BYU feels good. They're getting 5-star quarterback Ryder Lyons. But should they feel good?
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Notre Dame has quarterback battle. BYU doesn't, so those are two different teams that'll be on today's show. And what do we expect from Rich Rod in his return to West Virginia? All coming up today, and it's brought to you by 5-Hour Energy. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from. If you need one now, grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. Stock up today and stay energized. Jake Hatch, Locked On BYU Cougars, not the Houston variety. That's a different Big 12 team. Let's talk about Ryder Lyons, because this would be one of the biggest quarterback or just recruit commitments in the history of BYU football, and they're going toe-to-toe with the big boys nowadays, like USC, Oregon in the fold, amongst others. BYU seems to be feeling good. They've got a visit on the schedule, but how good should they be feeling really?
I think they should be feeling fairly confident in terms of their potential to land a guy like Ryder Lyons, Spencer. The bigger point is that you mentioned it would be one of the biggest recruiting wins in BYU football history, and that's the simple fact of life. It would signal, I think, if they pull it off, that BYU has the cachet that they've always desired, especially as a member of the Power Four.
I look at this recruitment and say it would be the pivot point of BYU into the modern era. You see this with DJ, I'm not going to attempt his last name, on the basketball side of things, right? Big number one overall recruit, and all the reports are, yep, BYU looked at their NIL collective and said, hey, we got to have more. Kind of seems like they have more. If they go toe-to-toe with USC and, like I said, Oregon in the fold, amongst others, and they land Ryder Lyons, to me, that would be the crystallization for BYU fans of, hey, we're here now. If we can go out and land these sorts of kids, yeah, it's a quarterback. Yeah, there's the LDS connection. I get it. But still, this is not someone that typically is going to take a look at the Cougars, and I think it could be kind of a pivot point for BYU on the trail.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Here's the thing. If they beat, you mentioned USC, Oregon, Ole Miss is in the mix here, and Michigan's in the mix here. Those are some of the biggest heavy hitters in terms of the college game today, in terms of the recruiting prowess that all of them possess. Obviously, I know that you do Locked On Ducks in addition to this fine podcast, and Oregon, they've got as much money as anybody, if not more than anybody when it comes to football. And if BYU can beat out an Oregon for a guy like Ryder Lyons, yeah, I absolutely agree. It would be a pivot point for the Cougars.
The interesting calculation with Ryder Lyons, Jack, who's Jack? I don't even know. Brain is mush, man, just straight mush. Anyway, the interesting calculation is USC has a quarterback commit in the 2026 cycle. Now, Ryder Lyons expected to take a one-year mission, so really he's a 2027 recruit, but USC has Jonas Williams, who they flipped from Oregon. And I get the sense, from a semi-outsider standpoint, we'll say that Oregon kind of was okay with that so that they could go after either Jared Curtis or Ryder Lyons in the 2026 cycle. So it's all these musical chairs just flying around. Everyone wants to have typically one quarterback a cycle, sometimes two. But the interesting thing is I get the sense that Ryder Lyons is not the top target for Oregon on the trail, that they would rather have Jared Curtis. That's down to Oregon and Georgia. But if Curtis, who's committing verbally on May 5th, winds up picking Georgia, all of a sudden you could see Oregon's attention to Ryder Lyons ratchet up a lot. And I think that those dynamics just make this so interesting to play out over the next couple of months, because as I mentioned earlier, BYU's got the official visit now, right? And that's huge for the Cougars.
Yeah, it is. It's one of the three scheduled, and it'll be actually the third of the three that he has scheduled currently. So as it stands, BYU will get the final say in terms of bringing him on campus in an official capacity. Going back to your point, though, this is the interesting part about Ryder is he could be part of the 2026 signing class, but you can take a quarterback because BYU has Keneal Sweetwine, who is already committed as their 2026 quarterback. They'd be taking Ryder Lyons with the whole thought process, Spencer, that he's their 2027 class quarterback, and they're totally okay with that. I think Oregon's okay with it, and USC is okay with it as well.
Yeah, I think for Oregon, they don't have to get, if they were to not get Curtis, but get Lyons and see him as the 27 guy, they could still be okay. Because frankly, for 26, I'd suspect Dante Moore is back. Either him or Austin Novosad. You have Achilles Smith Jr. and Luke Moga already on the roster. Like, I think they feel like they're all right. But you also never know how those guys are going to develop, right? Achilles Smith Jr. is a true freshman. Luke Moga is a redshirt freshman. Are either of those guys able to be a starting caliber quarterback by 2026? Time will tell. But then you have the back and forth of, well, would we expect this guy to be ready? You'd think maybe, but not every 5-star quarterback or even every 5-star player, regardless of position, is ready to go right away. But spring football underway in Provo, Jake. Give me your biggest headline of what BYU has to do to be right back in the Big 12 championship picture.
Biggest thing is make sure they retool versus rebuild. And the thing is, the roster is not by any means depleted here, Spencer. Yes, they lost some weapons on the offensive side of the football. They have to retool their offensive line. They've got to find a nice complement for Chase Roberts, a wide receiver, with Darius Lassiter leaving. They got to retool the defensive line. But quite honestly, I look at what BYU did on the recruiting trail, particularly in the transfer portal, and I think they addressed almost all of those questions. And if they just kind of continue to keep the course and what they did last year, maybe just upgrade it just a little bit, avoid a few more turnovers, avoid having an off game like they had against Kansas, they very well could find themselves back in the Big 12 title mix, and they have every intention of doing just that.
When you look at this BYU roster with a spring transfer portal window opening in less than 2 weeks, do you see any areas, or based on what's happened in spring football, think there have been any emerging needs for the Cougars and Kalani Sitake?
Emerging needs, I don't think there's like a dire need, but emerging needs, I would look at the defensive line. Maybe if you can find another defensive tackle to pair alongside a former Utah defensive tackle, Keanu Tanavasa, I'd look there. I would also potentially look at maybe a corner. Those are really the two areas that I would look at right now. But the nice part about it is BYU's not in a position where they have to have somebody at those positions. They can essentially look at it and say, we will take the best player or players available that we can get out there.
Their win total, according to our friends at FanDuel, sits at 7.5. Now, it's April, Jake. I give you the right to go back on this, the answer to this question by the time the season actually rolls around, because we'll let things marinate. We'll see a spring game. We'll do all of that sort of stuff. 7.5. Would you lean towards the over or the under for BYU?
Over. Easy. I think BYU will clear that relatively easily based on how things look right now. I said they've got the vast majority of their roster back. They've got a quarterback who was, I think, above average and should take another step forward in Jake Retzloff. I would think BYU, I would put the over-under at like 8.5 or 9, in my opinion.
Jake thinks they're undervalued. That's just Cougar homerism, you know. That's obviously all it. No, I kid, of course. Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU. Great as always, my man. No quarterback battle in Provo. Yes, quarterback battle in South Bend, Indiana, with more guys in the fold than you realize. First, this episode brought to you by Fabric. Life moves fast, especially when you have a family. One day you're watching your kids take their first steps, and before you know it, they're off to college. That's why securing their future is so important. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it simple to get term life insurance that fits your family's needs. With Fabric, you can apply for term life insurance online right from your couch. You could be covered in under 10 minutes, and in many cases, no health exam is required. You want peace of mind as a parent? Of course you do. You want to make sure your family's financially protected no matter what happens. Fabric gives you that peace of mind. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their families. Apply today in just minutes at meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. That's meetfabric.com/lockedoncollege. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Assurance Company. Not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. Check them out at meetfabric.com. FabricJoin.com/LockedOnCollege. Then go check out my friends over at Prize Picks. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. It's fast and simple. Setting a lineup takes less than 60 seconds, and when you win, your payout is quick, safe, and secure. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash, whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs. Prize Picks keeps every game exciting. Download the app today and use code LockedOnCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. It's that simple. $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup with the code LockedOnCollege at Prize Picks. That is where you want to go. Prize Picks, run your game. One of the biggest quarterback battles in the country has not 2 guys involved, 3 guys involved. I bet you didn't know that, but Tyler Wojciak of Locked On Irish did. That's why he's here to discuss what's taking place in South Bend. So I want your thoughts on my take first on this Notre Dame quarterback battle, Tyler. I think whoever wins this job is walking into one of the best situations in the entire country for several reasons. Reason number 1, you're not going to be asked to do a ton. Reason number 2, you're going to have a great offensive line, maybe the best in college football. Reason number 3, you've got a veteran offensive coordinator in there. And reason number 4, you have one of the 2 best running back tandems in the entire country. So it matters who wins, but in the back of my mind, I can't get rid of this thought of, I don't know that if it's close between these 3 guys who we'll get to, I don't know that it matters a ton because so little is really required for Notre Dame to succeed.
I think you're right. Whoever does win the job is walking into a great situation, but I think that actually complicates the decision a little bit because it is a true 3-man competition. I think each quarterback brings something different to the table. You got Steve Angeli, who's been the true backup for this team the past 2 seasons. It's actually kind of surprising that he hasn't had more opportunities to play. I mean, Riley Leonard ran the ball 1 billion times last year and had dealt with like 3 injuries prior to last season. And yet he was able to stay healthy throughout the year. So he never really had his turn. He'd come in garbage time and had that famous drive in the last series, the first half against Penn State. So he's the experienced guy. He's been around. He's played a little bit in garbage time. He's steady. He has an understanding of the offense, and he's been waiting his turn. So then behind him, you have Kenny Minchey, who's been around the program for 2 years now. He's kind of forgotten in this quarterback race because you have CJ Carr behind him. I'll get to him in a second. Kenny Minchey is the best runner of the group. Mike Denbrock, the Notre Dame offensive coordinator, certainly likes to run the ball with the quarterback, as we saw with Riley Leonard and with Jane Daniels when he was the OC at LSU. Then you've got the redshirt freshman, CJ Carr, who's like borderline 5-star, huge name. Grandpa's Lloyd Carr. Everyone thinks that he has the highest ceiling. So on one hand, yes, they're going to walk into a great situation. So does that make it a situation where you're more willing to take a risk and go with the redshirt freshman CJ Carr, who has a higher ceiling, but maybe is more prone to mistakes? Or do you just roll with Steve Angeli, who you're probably have more trust in just because he's older, and you look around, you're like, hey, as long as you don't screw this up, you're going to be fine. So many different layers to this conversation. I've talked about it nonstop in my show lately. So sorry for that long-winded response to start things off here, but you're right. Whoever wins is going to have a great situation.
I didn't bring you on to hear myself mostly talk. You're the Irish guy. We want the inside knowledge. That's, of course, what my audience is seeking out there, at least I would think, if they keep coming back and listening to or watching the show. So 3 very different options. The highest ceiling guy, the experienced backup, and the runner. If ever there was a time, Tyler, where I'd say a 2-quarterback system of sorts could perhaps work out, this seems like it to me if one of those guys is the runner. Because even if you put a quarterback in the game and everybody on the field and watching at home knows, oh, they're gonna run the football here, doesn't mean that you can always stop it. Everybody knew Riley Leonard was running quarterback power if you had 3rd or 4th and less than 3 yards. You knew that was going to show up. Didn't always matter. So could you see that being something that plays out this season for Notre Dame where, hey, we think that Steve Angeli is the safest option, but if he struggles, maybe we give it to Carr, but then we always have packages for, the other option.
It could work. I don't think Marcus Freeman has much of an appetite for it. I think he just wants to ride with one guy and stick with him. Now, I mean, this is only going to be his 4th year as head coach, and he even said this is his first time where there's been a legitimate three-man competition, but in reality, he means legitimate competition because when Notre Dame brought in Sam Hartman, everyone knew he was going to be the starter, even though they tried to say that it was a competition between him and Tyler Buchner. Last year, Ryder Lyons, Steve Angeli, same deal. So I think he wants to stick with the guy and roll with him. Now, instead of rotating two guys during the same game, I could see a situation where they roll with Steve Angeli to start the year because Notre Dame's schedule to start the year is absolutely brutal. I think it's harder than anyone else in the country because they open on the road against Miami. Then they have a week off, which kind of sucks as a fan. It's like the Major League Baseball opening day. You get so excited for the season opener, and then you're like, all right, baseball's back. Actually, wait, day off, and then they start playing again the next day. But then the home opener is against Texas A&M. So if they had a softer schedule to start the year, I think they'd be more willing. Let's say they want to go with CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, the two inexperienced guys. It'd be easier to make that decision if they're playing like Tennessee Tech or someone in the opener. But when you have to go on the road to play against Miami in the season opener, I think there is a serious possibility that they roll with Steve Angeli to start the year because he's been there and done that to some degree. And then maybe a few weeks down the road, they'd be open to making a change depending on how Angeli plays. Think like Clemson in 2018 when they started with Kelly Bryant and then they ultimately switched to Trevor Lawrence for the rest of the year. I think that's in play, but I don't really see them rotating two quarterbacks in the same game throughout the season.
Last year, the passing game was the biggest question mark I had about the Irish going into the playoff, and I did pick them to win every game except the national championship in their run because I felt like Marcus Freeman was just coaching better than every other staff he was going up against, and that ultimately played itself out. But I think one of the issues that arose in the Ohio State game, they had the opening drive, they go down the field, they run the ball a bunch, and it's this long, physical, tough, grinded out game. And you watch that and thought, you're not going to be able to play an entire game that way. You can't repeat that drive more than maybe one other time against this Ohio State team. Eventually, Riley Leonard found the passing rhythm at the end of the game, and Jaden Greathouse got involved, and he's back, and that's great news for whoever is the Notre Dame starting quarterback. But do you think last year's passing offense was limited more because of limitations they felt Riley Leonard had, or do you think that's how Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock want this offense to look? Because if you look at what Denbrock did at LSU with Jaden Daniels when he had a top 5 quarterback, maybe in the NFL right now, and a bunch of great receivers, they threw it down the field all the time. But then with this offense, they didn't. What do you make of that dynamic?
No, I don't think that's the offense they want to run. And Mike Denbrock actually spoke to the media this week during spring practice and had some pretty strong statements about the offense last year compared to this year. It's important to point out that last year was his first year as the OC in this term. He's actually been on the Notre Dame coaching staff. This is his third term. Wow, that's a loaded word these days. So he was an offensive coordinator last year for the first year, and now going into year 2, he said, look, I have the quote right in front of me. We were not very confident in anything we did in the passing game a year ago. That I think you'll see take a huge leap in year 2. And he also said, talking about the wide receivers, we dropped the football way too much last year. We got to make those plays. So he definitely wants to push the ball downfield. I think it goes down to two main things. One, Riley Leonard, love the guy to death. He's going to go down as one of my favorite Notre Dame players ever. But he just wasn't as accurate as you would want. And not only was he not that accurate, I don't think there was a level of trust with him and the receivers. And it's also partially because the receivers were not very good last year. Like Notre Dame brought in Bo Collins out of the transfer portal from Clemson. He was solid. He led the team in drops with 7. Jaden Greathouse really came on during the playoff, but honestly, throughout the regular season, he wasn't that impactful. He exploded in the final 2 games, and it couldn't have happened at a better time. But I do think the wide receivers are going to be better this year. I've said that for multiple years now, but I have more faith in it because I think we're going to see Jaden Greathouse closer to the one we saw at the end of the year. I think Jordan Faison is going to take a leap. I think Malachi Fields, the transfer they got from Virginia, is better than any transfer wide receiver that Notre Dame has ever had before. And I think that whoever's the quarterback is going to be more accurate, and there's going to be more of a willingness to push the ball downfield. So, it's funny. Notre Dame finished 10th in scoring offense last year. They lose the starting quarterback, but I actually think that they should be better on offense this year despite some of that turnover.
Tyler Wojciak, Locked On Irish. Big expectations, as always, in South Bend. What sort of expectations are in Morgantown, West Virginia? You'll just have to stick around to find out. First, this episode is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling the lost hour of sleep, 5 Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through, whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day. 5 Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. Basketball madness is everywhere, right? I've been staying up late watching all the tournament action, and sometimes I need a little boost to power through. 5 Hour Energy is that boost for any time of day. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. If you need one now, grab a 5 Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They are everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized with 5 Hour Energy.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
How big should expectations be in Morgantown this year? Mountaineer Paul's here to discuss just that, host of Locked On Mountaineers. So West Virginia and the Rich Rodriguez reunion is now officially underway as we've moved into spring football. Paul, your expectations are high, low, Goldilocks style, just in the middle. Where do you think West Virginia fans' head should be?
Yeah, it's interesting, man. So looking at some of the numbers, right? West Virginia has brought in, as of right now, the exact amount of players that Jack State brought in last year. Overall, close to 60 new players on this roster. They lost 3 games in a row, then they obviously won 9 in a row, won their conference championship. Probably not going to do that in the Big 12, Spencer. So I'm assuming that the expectations for this team, bowl eligibility at best, in my opinion, in year one, just based off the sheer numbers, the sheer amount of players we have returning. We have less than 2 starters on each side of the ball returning, just an incredible number, like basketball kind of numbers where you just have nobody back. We got a quarterback that started a couple games and Jaheim White on offense, and we've got a couple defensive linemen on defense. No secondary players are back, nothing. Probably our biggest acquisition is Zach Alley, from Oklahoma, the defensive coordinator, will play a huge role, and they've had that defense looking really good. But overall, just so much movement. I won't count Rich Rod out, but I would say bowl eligibility is a good place to start.
Yeah, I feel like that volume of player movement to West Virginia has kind of gone under the radar. If it's not Colorado, then it's not a big portal move. Or Ole Miss, brings in a lot of players, but not even the same volume. But 60 new players, is that something where you kind of expect it to be maybe a bit of a slower start to begin the season as they feel things out and just try to get their footing and figure out how the chemistry works, particularly on offense?
Well, one of the things that's going to help is obviously he brought in a slew of those Jacksonville State players, some of their best players too. Some of those guys boarding on 4-star transfer status, really good players. So Cam Vaughn at wide receiver, one of the best guys. Obviously Fred Perry at safety, one of the best guys they had on that team last year that won a conference championship in the CUSA. So they do have good players. I still think that it's going to be definitely, it's an overhaul, right? There's a lot going on. You've got a brand new defensive coordinator. And so even the incoming players from last year have nothing to work with. It's new to everybody. So unfortunately, it's definitely going to be a tough situation, but we feel good about the player acquisition in general and how many players have come in.
None of it really matters, though, when you're talking about having a successful season, especially in the Big 12. If your quarterback play isn't any good, Garrett Green out the door, no longer West Virginia's quarterback. So sounds like there's a battle brewing over there in Morgantown. Where do you expect that to go? Where do you want it to go, and who's involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Jalen Henderson out of Texas A&M, just a crazy story. Started his career at Fresno State, never played a game, and transferred up to Texas A&M. I don't know how many times you've ever heard that, but it happened there.
This is my first time hearing about it.
That's just talent, though. Somebody recognizes talent, and it proved to be legitimate. He played at Texas A&M, had a really good 5-game run before he got hurt. Rich Rod's betting on that upside. And when you look at him, a lot of similarities to Pat White in his game. So he's a lefty. He can really move, and he's perfect for what Rich Rod wants to do in that offense. But Nico Marchiol was still here too, who was a 4-star player 3 years ago coming out of high school, top 100 player. So he's the incumbent. He started several games. He's never lost a game in his career out of 4 starts. That's worth something. And he is the fan favorite. He's been loyal. And here's the thing. If he wins and is successful, he'll stick around. That's the big thing a lot of people are looking at with him is like, yeah, it would be great if Henderson plays well, but if he has a breakout year, we don't know what will happen. We know Nico's sticking around no matter what. He sat behind Garrett Green knowingly. He stayed here even after all the change with Neil Brown. There's a lot to really dissect with the situation, but I think right now it's an even battle. I'd give the slight edge to Nico because he's got at least he's been here portion of that covered. He doesn't have to adjust to a lot, but they're both learning a new offense and both are mobile. They're both lefties. Like there's a lot of similarities there. Just purely
both
watching the
lefties.
tape.
Both.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure everybody's hearing that correctly.
Our top 3 are lefties.
I don't think that has to be the only program in college football that can say we have a 100% chance of starting a left-handed quarterback this year. I don't think I've ever seen that before either. West Virginia's just all about making history, aren't they?
Right. Rich Rod said he hasn't seen it either. It just happened to work out that way, but it is great for continuity in the offense. We do know a lot of cases, especially with quarterbacks, you memorize one side of the field a little bit more than the other based on your dominant hand. At least you don't, and it's harder on the other players, right? If you have to switch the field over to one side, a lot of times it can be harder to flip that for the other players, the other 10 guys. So in this case, that won't have to happen.
Yeah, your right tackle is your left tackle now in terms of importance, and that's the case no matter who wins the job. But you said it's pretty even right now. How do you think one guy separates himself from the other?
Summer. I think it's going to happen in the summer. It's going to be the guy that makes the most plays. Rich Rod has made no bones about it. One thing about that makes his offense unique is we play with 11 players. That includes the quarterback. So whoever does that best, whichever quarterback plays the best in this system, makes the most plays in camp, simply will start. There is no allegiances with Rich Rodriguez. He has no filter. He tells us this every week. And the simultaneously having to cut this roster down to 105 is really grating on him right now. And we've already been told we're going to expect another dozen or so more experienced, whatever that means, players in the portal coming in the spring when that thing opens up again.
Players that are going to come to West Virginia, you mean?
Oh yeah, there's at least a dozen, maybe 15 more coming in, and they're going to be making cuts. He's openly talked about it. And like I said on the show, it's funny how Dion got destroyed for this a couple years ago, and now it's pretty much common practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's not something every program does, certainly. I do think you see it more often. I mean, you look at what Curt Cignetti did at Indiana last year, and he had more success with it in a tougher league than Dion did at Colorado, and I think that it certainly can work. It can also not work. Like, I don't view it necessarily in a hugely different way on a short-term basis. I think over the long run, you want to recruit, you want to build your program through your high school recruiting ranks. But I mean, for a 1-2 year stopgap solution, I think being so portal heavy can in fact work and be successful. But speaking of the portal, Paul, there are a lot of guys that have come in. Is there one transfer in particular you think has to shine for this West Virginia team outside of the quarterback situation for them to make a bowl game?
Yeah, it's Jamori Robertson. He's got a 94 overall grade in the portal, 6'5", 250. Would have been a mid-round NFL draft pick if he would have went into the draft. West Virginia just paid him not to do that. West Virginia also paid probably the second best transfer, Michael Coach Jr., not to go on his Ole Miss visit. That's been able to independently confirm that. So, they really swung for the fences. Rich Rod got a lot of support financially, obviously from billionaire Ken Kendrick, Pat McAfee giving millions. there's a lot going into the program financially, which you have to have, obviously, to succeed. Jamoy Robinson is at the very top of that list, somebody that everybody wanted. If he would have went to Ohio State, you would have blinked an eye. He's that good of a player, defensive player of the year at UTSA in that conference last year. Those guys don't grow on trees in the portal.
Mountaineer Paul, great as always. If I have to tell you all what show Mountaineer Paul hosts, then you're probably not paying attention. That is all for today. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.